This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's September 27th, 2022. I'm Ross John Fortune. Women in leadership often face hurdles that men do not face. Depending on their intersectional identities like age and race, leaders can face stereotypes in the workplace as they try to manage. Women are sometimes deemed too emotional to lead, and that expression of emotion can be seen negatively. The book Beyond Leaning In tackles these issues in a slightly different way. Told as a novel, the book draws on research, lived experience, and narratives to explore the ways that women navigate organizational structures across identities. Melanie Ho is the author of Beyond Leaning In and is the founder of Strategic Imagination, a firm dedicated to drawing on the power of the imaginative arts to help organizations achieve transformational change. She previously served as SVP and GM of Research at EAB Global, an education technology and services firm. After a short break, she'll join me to discuss her book and the conversations around equity in organizations.
When a shiny new technology pops up, when a newly discovered flaw exploits a bedrock legacy system, when Congress and leadership demand modernization but won't provide more resources, when every update is critical, you need analysis that cuts through the noise to tell you exactly what you need to know. Join the Next Gov team as we speak with relevant federal leaders and experts to break down the science, the tech, the policies, and the people behind the latest emerging technologies. Subscribe in the Apple Store, Google Play, or through your favorite podcast platform to make sure you get the latest critical update.
Women often find themselves on the wrong side of the gender gap, especially as they move up within a workplace hierarchy. Our guest today has a novel, Beyond Leaning In, Gender Equity and What Organizations Are Up Against, that looks at the challenges that women see in workplace equity and leadership and what organizations can and need to do to fix this stuff. Melanie Ho is the author of Beyond Leaning In and is founder of Strategic Imagination, a firm dedicated to drawing on the power of the imaginative arts to help organizations achieve transformational change. She previously served as SVP and GM of Research at EAB Global, an education technology and services firm headquartered here in DC. She joins me now to discuss gender equity in organizations and, of course, her book. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Ross. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's sort of talk about the book first. Why did you write it, and why did you do it in this novel format instead of the sort of classic leadership kind of help books?
Yeah, it's a great question and one I get a lot. My book, you'll find it in the social science section or women's studies section or business section. There are copious footnotes, but it's written as a novel. And it really came to me as I realized just how much amazing research there was out there that people weren't accessing. I had, at the time, Sheryl Sandberg published Lean In 2013, felt both excited about her book, but also frustrated. Excited because I think it's such a powerful message for women. At the time, I was really rising in leadership. My friends and I would listen to her TED Talk about how women need to take our seat at the table as a way to motivate ourselves before asking for raises and promotions. And Sheryl Sandberg in her book is very specific about the fact that leaning in is only one slice of the pie. There's other things involved. I became really interested in those other things, how it's harder for women to lean in, the penalties and uneven rewards when we do, how leaning in almost presupposes a very stereotypically masculine way of interacting in the workplace, be more aggressive, interrupt, take up your space. There were thousands of pages, books, articles about all of these other factors that have nothing to do with lean in. And yet I found that no fault of Sheryl Sandberg, her message kind of dominated the discourse so much. And I wondered, well, how do we get people to pay attention to all of these other challenges that women face? I had, before I entered the corporate world, gotten my PhD in English, written a dissertation called Useful Fiction about early 20th century novels and how they helped professionals make sense of the 1920s are very much like the 2020s, extremely confusing, a lot of change. And the novel became a kind of self-help, a kind of education, a way to help people make sense of the world around them. And so that was something I had written my dissertation on it, thought I'd left that behind. But as I climbed the corporate ladder and talked to women across industries about the issues we were facing, I thought, oh, actually, I think the novel would be a good format for talking about these issues, both as a way to engage people in the research. I think people often start leadership books and never finish them. And my hope was with a story, people would want to finish the book. They could go to the footnotes if they wanted to learn more. But I also thought it was important to get both men and women, folks across genders and also across generations, having conversations about these topics in a way they might not normally. And so I wrote the book from the perspective of 7 different characters across genders, across generations, at all levels of the hierarchy in a fictional workplace. And my hope is that everybody finds a character or several like them, but also is able to get into the perspective of the characters unlike them.
Well, sort of to that point, let's sort of jump into how you see these issues, not just within the context of the book, but in the context of your experience and within the context of the world at large. Generationally, how do you see that as such that splits so much? I know the book deals with it a lot within those characters, but just in general, how do you see it outside of that context?
Generationally, I think a lot of it in terms of, in the past, a lot of the focus was on representation and just having sheer numbers of women at the table. And there was so much need for that because women weren't in the room at all often, that we hadn't yet got into, okay, once women are in the room, it's not just diversity, it's also equity and inclusion. How are they treated? Are their talents being used? So I think that's the first part. I think the second part comes to almost what older generations had to put up with because it was the only way, again, they could get a seat at the table. I also draw comics, some based on scenes in my book. And I drew one I call Mother-Daughter Movie Night. And it's a mother and daughter watching a scene from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. There's a scene in the film, for those who haven't seen it, it's essentially a romantic comedy. It includes a daughter who at one point is frustrated with her mother because she feels like her mother lets the father make all the decisions. And the daughter says to the mother, why are you doing that? The mother says, well, the man may be the head of the house, but the woman is like the neck, and I can turn the head any way I want. And in my comic, I draw this mother and daughter watching it together, and the mother says to the daughter, remember this at work too. Get the men to think things that are their idea. And the daughter is saying, hey, I don't know about that. Does it have to be that way? And to me, that really symbolizes what's happening in the workplace often. That older generations had to play by the rules of the so-called boys club. They had to do things like get men to think things are their idea. We have younger generations pushing back and saying, well, shouldn't we change the system? And a lot of folks like myself kind of caught in between and saying, okay, I had to play by some of those rules. I definitely got men to think things were their idea if I knew that I wouldn't be heard. I definitely did things like learn how to interrupt, to keep raising my voice progressively with each sentence so that I didn't come across as too aggressive at the beginning, but eventually kind of played their game. And I don't want to pass that advice on because I don't want younger women to have to do that. I think we need to change the system and the culture, but at the same time, I don't want to not pass that advice along. I don't want to deprive them of that information.
With the obvious caveat that I am being a white man. I guess that let's sort of dig into that a little bit more as far as both generational and sort of in the DEI space. Like, who makes the rules of the game? You know what I mean? Like, you talked about speaking forcefully, being more interruptive, those kinds of things. How much change does that require to make it more equitable, and how do we and inclusive, and how do we make those changes without sacrificing a lot of stuff in the short term, because you certainly got to get pushback.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges. How do we figure out systemic change at the same time as look for those quick wins. And I actually write a lot about the problem of quick wins themselves and the obsession that we have in US culture and workplace culture with solving problems as quickly as we can and kind of killing the problem. And so I do think it's sort of a multifaceted approach. We need to understand the larger system, but at the same time, any manager and any employee in any given context can be more mindful of how they interact with their colleagues, how they support one another, what culture they both set and are a part of, say, in a day-to-day meeting.
So you talked about, you just mentioned a favorite topic of mine about particularly when we talk about American history and American culture, this idea that like there are these discrete solutions that we can dust ourselves off and go, all right, done, no problem. Like the example I use usually is race, particularly when it comes to African Americans, like slavery. All right, slavery is no longer there. We're done. Everything's good. And we have this sort of idea that the problem was solved by the great men of history or some discrete thing. So to that end, you drew a comic about this, about the mile one versus the marathon of DEIA solutions. And, a company brings in a consulting firm and they have a retreat or something. And then, okay, we're good. Everybody's happy, whatever. And the boardroom still looks the same. Can you sort of expand on that about the DEIA marathon versus the sort of quick fix it relief?
I think, unfortunately, a lot of employers, and I say unfortunately at the same time that I have great empathy with anyone who's in a leadership role and has to make a ton of tough decisions every day and has these checklists. They're never ending. And because of that, does not excuse it, but it does explain why often employers are just looking to check the box and they're looking for something fast. Often that is something like an unconscious bias training. Most of us by now have had an unconscious bias training in the workplace. Unconscious biases are unconscious. They are so deeply wired in our heads. They can't just be erased with a 1-hour session that happens in the middle of the workday in between a lot of other meetings. And so a lot of what I see more advanced organizations trying to do, and again, this is very hard, is say, let's look a little bit deeper. Let's say that the training has already happened. What are all of the policies and processes that might be enforcing biases? And as we even think about our day-to-day behaviors with one another, how do we change that?
So allyship, certainly something that we've, a lot of us have seen on this topic. What's the role of particularly men in allyship when it comes to the gender dynamic and empowering women leaders?
So for me, the first role is actually for male allies to realize the problem is more complex than they often have been led to believe or to think. I have a friend who's a business professor, and she focuses on gender and finance. And she told me once how whenever she talks to one of her male colleagues about the fact that that's her research area, they will immediately respond with, oh, I know all about the challenges women face because my daughter or sister or wife or some woman in their life tells me that the problem is X. And it's sort of like that one thing that they then think is the magic bullet, and maybe they'll create a training around it. Or they'll tell people that's the thing we need to fix. The problem's more complex. So I think the first thing is understanding. The second, to me, is really thinking about how men and women are socialized differently to interact in group spaces. I use the metaphor from basketball of points versus assists. And I'm not a sports person, but when I was growing up, I would sit and watch basketball games with my dad. He loved basketball. We lived in LA. He was really into the Lakers. And I remember him explaining to me, the players can get points, but they can also get assists. And actually, a team can't win unless there are assists because people have to pass the ball to the person who gets the points. But that we have this culture, American individualism, that is very focused on the points instead of assists. And I think that applies to all kinds of things at work. We can think of it in terms of just meetings, that the people who are focused on points are focused on my idea is this. How am I advancing my own individual viewpoint? And the focus on assists might be something like, oh, Haley had a great idea, or not even agreeing with someone. It might be, hey, Ross, actually, you had a different idea. I know you disagree, but let's figure that out. It's about advancing the overall collective aims, and that happens in meetings. It happens just in terms of who does what in the office, who volunteers to do event committees, to do the mentoring. Those are really often more about assists because they don't help towards promotions. And men are socialized towards these points and women are socialized towards these assists, and both are necessary. But it's really about figuring out that balance.
Yeah, I know that's something I know we credit is in the sort of dog eat dog world, oftentimes of these kinds of rooms, credit becomes this great currency. And yeah, it's good to set people up for the assist as someone who does like sports, although I haven't played basketball very much recently because I'm not a particularly tall man. We'll end on your career a little bit and the book. How has your career and your experiences sort of in the industry world influence your experiences about the book and influence your experiences and your work?
So probably two different ways. When I think about the challenges that I cover, they are ones that I absolutely faced and realized more as I climbed up the ladder. I think that I came into the workplace, to age myself, I'm kind of in that place in between Generation X and Millennial. And I think we're often called Zennials or the Oregon Trail generation. And so I kind of came into the workplace having been told that the problems were fixed. Now, I remember in high school, that was when the Year of the Woman was, and suddenly there were a lot more women in Congress than ever before. There were actually still relatively few women, but there was this narrative of things were getting better. And so by the time I got into the workplace, I thought, oh, things are getting better. And I would notice things around me. But I kind of mistakenly thought that as I got more senior, it would get easier. And I know a lot of women in my cohort sort of believed that. We would look and we'd see that there were some women in leadership positions, and we'd say, oh, we can get there too. And what I think I wasn't aware of, largely because it just wasn't talked about openly, was that as women get more senior, it actually gets harder. You're often more likely the fewer women and the only woman in the room. The Goldilocks dilemma that women face, the sort of tightrope of balancing both stereotypically masculine and stereotypically feminine behaviors in a way that women have to do, gets harder as you move up. You have to figure out some of the challenges of what kind of advice are you passing down to younger women and more junior women, and how do you balance helping them navigate the system with also trying to change the system at the same time. I could go on. I guess the sum of it was just seeing that it did get harder. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just my workplace. I did a lot of research. I interviewed probably over 100 women over the course of 10 years, just in my free time, trying to get a sense of this. And I saw that and I thought, I want to ensure that as women come up, and also women who are already in senior places who are still wondering, is this just me? That they would be able to make sense of their experiences and at the same time help men understand the ideas as well.
Yeah, I imagine it's there's a lot there. And I think that is something that I know, certainly as someone who lives in the world and but also has obviously for this particular conversation is a little bit of an outsider. I think it's deeply helpful, at least for me, and your book was certainly not only a good read but very edifying in that sense. So Melanie, thanks for being on the show with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortune. We want to thank Melanie Ho for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.